We're raising discerning digital citizens. We're doing this in a crazy time. I hope that everybody leaves this feeling encouraged, a little bit less alone, and definitely more informed. About me, I am a counselor with Lighthouse Counseling Center here in New Orleans. I'm also on staff with Redeemer Presbyterian Church, who's the host for this meeting. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful that we can do this over this platform. I work as a counselor, and part of my job on staff is working with young people, families. And so the issue of media, social media, devices, pornography, those are really common topics that I find happening in my therapy office as well as in the church. And I know that people are wanting information, wanting to do this well, wanting to help their kids. So again, I hope that today provides a little bit of comfort in having that conversation. This timing is weird. It's great and it's weird. The timing is just what it is. And so in order just to kind of orient ourselves into the presentation today, we are going to practice being present. Because if there was a simple solution to how to manage media in your home, how to manage pornography, sexual content, the most simple answer would be to be present, to be engaged, to just show up fully you. And so knowing that our time is chaotic, and I know for me, I've had a hard time focusing this week. I'll start to do something and just kind of find myself wandering, and there's, I don't know where you are in your homes, but there's a good chance that there's a TV on or your phone pops up with a new message about something else that is another disturbance in our life. And so just I want us to kind of take a moment to try our best to focus and use that as sort of a practice moving into some of these conversations. So in order to do that, I'm gonna just kind of walk you through a little bit of a grounding exercise. I want everybody to take a deep breath. Just take it with me, breathing in and breathing out. And then I want you to take your hands and just rub them together so that you can kind of feel the warmth of your skin, activating your senses. And then I want you just to place them all around you, whether it's down on your lap, on the chair around you. And I want you just to notice what you feel. We're just grounding ourselves into our senses, and that's a great place to go to when our minds feel really chaotic. So just notice, don't make any judgments about it. Just kind of pay attention to what's going on. And once we do that, it connects us, because it connects us to our humanity, that sensation of just being here right now. We don't have to be anywhere else. Today, I want you to take care of you. There's kind of the saying that you hear on the planes of put your oxygen mask on before you help others. Is going to be really important as we go through this presentation, as we go through talking about some of these conversations, is that your self-care is super, super important. The topic of sexuality, managing media, it's going to kick up old stuff. So it's important that you know your story, that you know where your vulnerabilities are, you know what you're good at, where you feel confident and where you feel weak, and to be really gentle on yourself. And like I said earlier, that you don't do this alone. So hopefully seeing some of the other folks here on the screen will be an encouragement to you to just to know that there's other people in your church or in your community that want to do this well, that have their own stories that may be similar to you or different, and that you can talk to them about it. So as we go through today, I also just want to give you the permission to take it at the pace that you need to take it. What's great about this being recorded is that if this just becomes too overwhelming, You know, it's been a long week. We've all felt it. You know, feel free to take a break, come back to it. If you need to kind of check out for a little bit just because stuff gets triggered, you know, that's totally fine. So I want you to feel like you have some power in what you can take on right now, and know that that's no judgment. That's actually the best thing that you can do for yourself. All right. So a little bit of our agenda for today. We're going to be just kind of covering basics of devices. Then the main areas we're going to focus on are social media and gaming, pornography, and then we'll finish it out with kind of setting practical boundaries. What is a boundary? Why do we set them? And then if we have time, if anybody has questions, I'll totally open it up to some questions and answers. And again, those, we can talk about it when we get there, but those can be something that you can say, I don't want this recorded, we do, whatever. We'll kind of figure it out as we go. So again, I want this to be a safe space for you to learn and interact. So again, just let me know if anything kind of pressing comes up or if I can help you in any way. All right, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit. So like we practiced getting present, I have these screens built in. After a couple of the topics, I'm just going to prompt you with some reflection questions. So this screen will be your cue. If you're watching this recorded, this is your cue to pause, because we probably won't have enough time in our live recording to really fully process some of the questions that I'm asking you and get into kind of what the experience is like for you. So this whole presentation is an encouragement for you to be more present with yourself, to be able to engage the kids in your life. And so that's only going to happen if we slow down and get clear. So when these screens come up, I am going to be throwing some questions at you. If you're watching it live, definitely try to jot something down on your phone or writing it down. Same if you're recording, and you can pause at that point. All right, so we are going to start off by doing a little inventory. So I had this experience earlier. Like I said, I'm looking at my desk and I was like, oh, that's a lot of screens. So I want you to think about how many devices currently you have in your home that have any sort of web-enabled access. So it can be a phone, anything here on the screen, smart TV, watches, that kind of stuff. So just kind of do a quick count up in your head of how many you have. I was laughing as I was putting together this presentation because these are images I pulled 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, the data that was then, so I think this was 2017 data, so it's probably looking at the year 2016. And the average number of devices in a household was at 7. And the average number from this year, so it's 2019's data, was 11. So it's really growing. Don't go down the rabbit hole. If you start to look up how many they project, how many devices they are projecting we will all have in, like, 2032 or whatever, it's a little frightening. It's a lot of devices. So just kind of take that in. And again, just kind of use it as data for yourself to know what's happening in your home. And this will be our first check-in. So I want you just to think for a second, what's coming up for you as you hear that number, that the average number is 11 of devices in households. I want you to think about the number of devices that are currently in your home, kind of to the best of your ability. And I want you to think about what thoughts, feelings come up with that. And then start to connect it to how might that influence how you talk to your kids about it, how your experience influences how you talk to your kids about it. Now, I want you to think about if you're in a relationship or co-parenting, is your experience similar or different to your partner's experience when they think about how many devices in the home? So just take a moment, kind of think that through, jot it down if you can. What we're going to be striving for today as we talk through all these different topics is we're going to try to find a sweet spot. The sweet spot in psychology is called dialectical thinking. So this can be your psych idea for the day. So dialectical thinking is the notion of being able to hold two seemingly opposite viewpoints. So my example for us today is that the digital age has brought disconnection and connection. Those are two opposing viewpoints. Did it bring disconnection? Did it bring connection? So we're actually going to start to hold that the truth is that it's both. To take that into your practical lives, into your conversations, I want you to then think about what are some other, maybe more specific issues that we could apply this idea to holding kind of opposite viewpoints there. The chances are high that when I prompted you just a moment ago, just maybe even kind of coming into the topic today, that there's some anxiety. I think that that's reasonable. I think that it's good in a lot of ways. And so we want to just be able to intervene and not feel overwhelmed by it. We want to encourage flexible thinking. So health and flexibility are kind of synonymous. So there's a chance that sort of dialectical thinking is something that you already do. I do think that some of us are more naturally inclined towards it than others, but it's definitely something that's possible for all of us. If we think about it theologically, there's lots of dialectical ideas that there's kind of these seemingly opposing views. Jesus talks about that, it's through dying that we live. Like that doesn't make sense, but those things are true. We think about ourselves as saint and sinner. We live in the already and not yet. These are things that just from the outside are seemingly opposing viewpoints, but sort of theologically, spiritually, we learn to hold both of them. And learning to practice this both in our spiritual walks, when it comes to ethics, values, conversations, family, parenting, learning to practice this can have a profound impact on your own processing and the way you approach some of these difficult conversations. All right, so we're gonna jump right into the social media and gaming world. So we are connected, literally, right now. We are very connected, and we're really grateful for that. I think, again, there was something about the weirdness of the timing of this that I was actually really excited about, and that we can approach this topic of sort of always being connected from a position of gratitude, that in a day that we are physically unable to be seeing one another, that we can still be connected and that the connection can be meaningful. I think it's there's been a lot of talk, judgment made about that, we're losing a lot of connection because of technology, devices, social media, and using our dialectical thinking. The data is there that it's like, yeah, we are more socially isolated than we've been, but there's also an opportunity for more connection. And again, that's where we can be grateful and experiencing moments like we are today, that we're all in different places. People can watch this in a week, 2 weeks, a month, from all over the place, and be able to jump in really without missing a beat. And so it's just here we are. And so we can be grateful. If we think about it this way, I thought this was interesting, that there's 4.5, they guess, you know, the data is pretty good, but there's 4.5 billion online users. And it's really unprecedented that we are connected on that level of so many people. Because when in the past, when people would say it takes a village to raise a child, pre-digital age, that village was maybe 100, 200 people that as an individual you had access to. Now, with the widespread access of the internet, that village has grown. I think we could say to about 4.5 billion. And using our dialectical thinking, I want us just to kind of hold that there are ways that this global village can both bring benefit and harm. And so we want to go through, as we think about these different topics, kind of how to know the difference, and again, just being able to hold both that there's benefit and then there's consequences in these, and just being able to be informed in our conversations, not being too one-sided or the other in our families and with our kids. So when we kick off the topic of social media and gaming, we want to start with knowing your own values around them. So for the first question, I want you just to kind of hold in your head. I want you to just ask yourself, is there a healthy way to engage with social media? Is there a healthy way to engage with online or video games in a healthy way? I would say yes. So social media for young people is their currency for social transaction. If you've seen any of them, whether they're individual, you know, when they're alone at home, or when they're in their groups, you know, this is what they're connecting over. And so it is really important to them. We'll talk about why this is so important, but social media is a way to engage, and we need to be able to encourage that for our kids. Gaming is another platform for both personal enjoyment and social interaction. So it's a way for kids to be able to connect even when they're in their own homes or coming together and playing games together. And so again, we want to just be able to know and truly honor and affirm that these are good things, you know, that we want them to be able to use them. We want them to be able to enjoy them. Enjoying social media, enjoying gaming are kind of just common graces that we can definitely encourage. So again, for you, just kind of go back to that question and ask yourself, do you have a sense of how to engage with social media and games in a healthy manner? Have you had any experiences being able to engage with social media or gaming in a healthy manner? Do you know what your kid enjoys about social media or games that they use? And then think about ways that you could engage with them, questions you could ask them. I'll be sharing more just kind of how to open up these conversations, but this is really key. What do they like about it? Help them teach you, and then you help and teach them. So then we move to having some informed concerns. So the four major concerns are going to be mental health and bullying. They kind of go together, legal issues, and then safety issues. And again, the question we're going to be trying to hit the hardest is how to start to address these concerns with your young person. The first one being mental health. So if social media is the currency, we have to ask why. So we're social creatures. We were and are designed to bond, and it is a primal need. When we don't have that, bad things happen. truly, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically. So when social media is unsafe, when it becomes harmful or obsessive, there becomes sort of that isolation. There's high rates of depression and anxiety related to overuse of social media. Body and appearance obsessions can start to come up, and also just sort of an unhealthy habit of looking for external validation and just not having a lot of flexibility of knowing how to get that sort of in real life. In gaming, some of the concerns are the stress that it can have on a young person. There can be the sort of pull to hyper focusing, specifically, and especially if there is any sort of like ADHD going on, any autism spectrum, there can kind of be that extra pull to hyper focusing. It has made it into the DSM as an addictive behavior. And so we have to kind of look at, again, that flexibility, in that like gaming can definitely be one that becomes really rigid for people and they really struggle to get out of there. And if it's addictive, then we know that the consequences are both on an emotional, a physical level, a relational level. Like the next point says, that there can be a strain on those peer relationships where it becomes super competitive. Bullying, that we'll talk about in a minute, can also be a part of the gaming, where kids are getting bullied because they're not good at it or are good at it. So it can kind of become that competitive problem within the relationships. And then lastly, probably the one that gets talked about the most is that the violent content can be desensitizing, and they're still not exactly sure kind of what long-term outcomes are, but it's definitely something to be aware of, just sort of like how much graphic and violent content the young person is consuming. Then we have bullying. All your kids have been exposed to anti-bullying campaigns in school, and like they need to be. It's if we go back to sort of the why social media is such a big deal, it's also why bullying is such a big deal, is because we're social creatures and our brains don't discriminate between physical pain and emotional pain. Pain is pain. So sort of that like sticks and stones won't break my bones, will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is just not, it's just wrong. It does hurt you, and your brain actually codes it as pain. And so whether it is bullying through physical or violence, or emotional, and emotional can be both aggressive, and it can also be isolating, kind of where the child is pushed out of the peer group. So we have to understand and really take it seriously, like when kids are experiencing this, when you notice that stuff's going on that's fishy, or you find that the friends that they used to be friends with are not their friends anymore, it's definitely something to start to explore with them, because that peer group is really, really important to them, and they're feeling pressure from all sides. So next we need to know about sort of the legal consequences of social media and gaming. So the most major legal consequence is if there's any sort of sexual content that's being shared, specifically talking about sexting. So the Children's Advocacy Center out of Children's Hospital does the best presentation. Your kids probably have had it. If not, they're going to have had it. They will have it. They go into all the schools from what I understand and teach kids about this. And I think they do a good job, not just kind of scared straight, you will go to jail kind of thing, but really empowering them to say, like, this is a big deal. The law takes this very seriously, that like sharing any sort of graphic sexual content of each other, of yourselves, has some serious ramifications. So when you are talking about, your kid being on any of the social media platforms in particular, but gaming consoles can be a place that it's often missed as well. You want to be talking to them about, like, hey, there are things that might get shared or you might be pressured into sharing that could have some serious consequences. And so just talking to them about that, seeing what they know about it, seeing if they've had any information, sent to them, whether it's through school or peer groups, but definitely something to go ahead and talk to them about. As well as safety issues. So these are, part of these difficult conversations. Again, you don't want to just fear factor them into them, but in order to have an informed conversation, you need to be able to talk about all these different topics. So if there is any sort of exploitation going on, the cyberbullying really becomes exploitive. I want you to know that you are not powerless, that you can respond. So I have just a screenshot of what cybertipline.org looks like. If there is any sort of exploitation of a minor going on, it can be with your kid, or if you know of a kid, or your kid comes home telling you about a kid or whatever, you can definitely take action steps to helping, advocating. So this is your online resource. And then I would definitely recommend speaking with law enforcement, speaking with school officials as this comes up, because this is where it taking a village is, that like when it's happening in our real lives, when it's happening online in those online lives, we do need to be there for one another, and especially for our kids, because they're navigating a lot, and we'll continue to talk through how we as adults are going to be the best guides for them. So I'm just gonna kind of go through what to talk about and when. So I'm gonna go through some different developmental stages and just kind of give you some tips for kind of what you can start to do at those different times in life, and what conversations you can go ahead and start putting in the works, and then what conversations you can be preparing for if you're kind of looking at making a transition into the next developmental stage. So for our youngest ones, we want to just limit our exposure to devices, and it's limit, not totally ban forever. Again, there doesn't need to be a fear of screens and devices. Really, what people are saying, what the scientists, researchers are looking at, is that limiting devices really is just an encouragement to incorporate a variety of activities for play and engagement, because play and engagement is what is going to set up those building blocks as the kid moves throughout their lifetime. In the younger years, it's really important that the adults in the home are modeling a balance of healthy screen time. And then you want to start kind of putting together your support system, talking with other parents, other caregivers about their views, values with media, technology use, to go ahead and set yourself up to know that you're not going to be doing this alone. And all the things that are here from, toddler years, birth and toddler years, to ready to launch, pretty much everything builds on one another. None of these things sort of fall off the map totally. They really just kind of evolve into different behaviors. As they get a little bit older, 4 to 8, starting school, you want to begin processing with them what they are hearing, what they are seeing. So this starts with setting and maintaining limits and expectations on screens. So you want to have a lot of control over what they're able to access, what they're able to see, how much they're able to access it, how much they're able to see. But again, you're not going to be in full control of that. The chances that they go to a family member's house or a friend and maybe they hear or see some things there, or it's just sort of a kind of bystander thing. You want to begin processing with them what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And you want to use really simple, calm language to responding to these curiosities. I think one of the harder things to do is, when a kid is grabbing for tablets and phones and wanting to do that, is to use that really strong kind of reactive language. And it's not bad to use that. Sometimes we need to use that, but we need to make sure that they're not getting the message that we don't want them to use this or it's bad. We don't want to use shame or fear as the main motivator in keeping them away from certain devices, certain information even. We want to just use simple, calm language to say, redirecting them, giving them something else to do, and helping say, like, this may be something that your older brother and sister get to do. You maybe get to do that when you're older, or use whatever is right for your household. Like I said, these years you definitely want to maintain as much restriction as you can. And so that looks like putting appropriate filters to limit access to harmful content. When we talk about pornography, I have some of my recommendations for apps and filtering software that I think is sort of the best out there. So you definitely want to go ahead and do that, because the more you can just kind of filter it out in the beginning, the more you're going to be able just to protect them from any early exposures. You want to be able to talk openly about having a safety plan for them to implement if they do come across anything harmful, confusing, or scary. And again, I think sometimes our brains jump to, oh gosh, they see something, that is just pornographic. We just kind of jump to worst case scenario. And yes, we want to have a safety plan for that, but it can also be just kind of that everyday stuff that we kind of will blow past of not that big of a deal, but that is confusing for them. So you want to be able to talk to them in advance as they're growing up, as you're just going about your daily life, whether it's watching TV or YouTube or whatever you guys do as just a part of your sort of normal routines, and having a plan. And again, as much as you can stay engaged in doing it with them, that's going to set you up to having these conversations in real time, not, after the fact when you hear about it or something else comes up. So the best that you can, stay engaged. When we get older, into the 9 to 13, starting to be into the older elementary, starting middle school years, this is when the social media talk is really important. They're going to be asking for it. So if they're not already, they will be. So you want to go ahead and have in your mind, really, I might move this to the 4 to 8 of that you might need to get clear on your expectations for yourselves, for your household, that what's okay with you, what's not. You need to do some research on the different platforms they're going to be asking for. Familiarize yourself with how they work and what are sort of the benefits, and then what are the consequences. And you as the parent get to weigh those out into saying yeah, this is something that I'm kind of willing to let you try with a lot of boundaries, or saying no, the consequences and the risks are just too high to let you have right now. So you want to be able to set those clear expectations. Once those expectations are set, then you want to take an engaged position, not an investigating position. Because if you take an investigating position, again, they're getting the message that like, this is really bad, and you're just kind of letting them do it until you find out something bad. So you want to kind of take the engaged perspective that you're hoping for the best for them. You're hoping, you're empowering them, that with the expectations that you have, with the boundaries that you've set in place, you want them to be free to love it, to enjoy it, to get the most out of it. And that if and when those boundaries gets pushed or something happens that's outside of the realm of what's expected, that they know what's coming down the line, that they don't have to be wondering, if mom finds out that so-and-so said this on here, what's going to happen. It's helpful for them to be able to know kind of what their limits are. You also want to be opening up, sort of in that same spirit of engagement, discussions that support their critical thinking. Help them and kind of help them help you. So if your kid is just like, oh, I have to have Snapchat at age 10, just sort of like, okay, what's that about? So Pauline's saying absolutely not. Before we get to absolutely not, maybe start to ask, like, what is that about? What are they looking for? Like, what would that mean to them if they could have Snapchat? Is it that they're just wanting more FaceTime with their friends? Maybe it's saying like, okay, I want you to have more FaceTime with your friends. Might not be through Snapchat, because again, maybe that's something that for you, the consequences and risks are too high. There's just kind of too much that you can't control, but you can honor and validate, like, all right, let's get FaceTime through a different platform. Maybe it is through FaceTime itself, or can we have more play dates, or whatever the things are, to be able to honor kind of what their longings and motivations are, but still maintaining your boundaries. Because again, as the parent, you know what's out there, what some of the risks are, and also you're responsible for monitoring that. So whenever I'm talking to parents about should I not, I keep going back to like, well, you're going to be the one having to monitor it. So if you're not comfortable with it, or it's too much for you to monitor, or whatever kind of the concerns are, like, then it's too much. You're the one responsible. You're going to have to be carrying this out at the end of the day. So we want to start supporting that critical thinking, and what that looks like across the lifespan should kind of become more clear as we talk about some different critical thinking. You also want to make sure that they're fully educated at this point about cyberbullying and pornography. So again, I'll give you some great resources for both, how to pick it out, sort of like, what is cyberbullying? What is pornography? Being able to identify it quickly, and then be able to have a plan in place of what should they do if they see it. Again, they should know that if this comes up, that they can talk to you, and that it's going to be an open dialogue, that you're going to ask questions about what they saw and kind of how they got there, but that they're not going to be in trouble, that there might be some consequences, and that you may need to tighten up on some filters, or there may need to be a break from whatever the device is, but that, like, you're not mad at them, they aren't bad for seeing these things, because again, you, in educating them, and we'll talk more about it, but you'll educate that, like, there's going to be things that are in their control, and there's things that are not totally in their control, and so you'll be able to empower both of those things. You'll continue to stay responsive and curious with them, and you'll be reassessing and modeling healthy screen time habits. And that can be a tough one. again, just sort of, we all can kind of lose track of how much we're on our phones, tablets, computers. And so we want to make sure that we're showing them and having these conversations as a family about, yeah, I do scroll these sites or this app a lot, and this is why I like it, and this is what I enjoy about it. And here are the things that I feel like it takes me away from. So starting to have some of those honest, assessing conversations, and then modeling for them what you would like them to be able to take with them as far as like what healthy screen time looks like. And then moving into those teenage years that everyone gets so excited about. So this is where the restrictions start to kind of come away. Don't hear me say they go away. They just start to kind of loosen up a little bit. But the conversations do not go away. The conversations just change. I want you to, in their teenage years, to be looking for opportunities to engage them in the critical thinking that you've already set up for in their middle school years. So when you find yourselves kind of in current events, on social media, news stories, you want to explore these social issues. You want to just be thinking out loud with them of sort of like, wow, I hadn't considered how using this may have impact on this people group. Or have you ever experienced, I did never know about this app. Have you guys heard about it? Kind of having those open conversations. How do you feel about it? Like kind of opening it up to them, really being curious about their experiences, about their thoughts, their opinions, and then taking it into the more specific and personal conversations around, what does this say about bodies? How does that impact you and your body image as an adult? And then exploring with them, like, how does that say something about what their body looks like or feels like? Looking at relationships, gender roles, and sexuality. So these are all areas for you to be kind of the wise guide, saying like, I'm here, I'm with you, I see all these things too. And I like critical thinking because it frees you up from feeling like you've just got to be the guru or the therapist or, just sort of like the perfect parent in figuring these things out and having like the perfect, social media contract and never letting them see certain things. And just, when you think about just having these conversations from a more critical thinking lens, then it frees you both up to just say like, we're figuring this out and we're figuring this thing out together. And I think that is so much more sustainable, especially when they're moving into those older teen years. And after 18, they're not in your house anymore. You're not in charge of their Wi-Fi anymore. That the foundation has already been set, that mom and dad are there to just talk through these issues. They're not there to come down and say, why are you still on that thing? They're not on there to, just judge or shame or do anything like that, that they are genuinely curious, and that like, even if they don't use this or don't really even like whatever the thing is, the conversation is still open to them, and they really need that. As I get older too, I want you to be able to share your own stories, to share your encouragements, share your cares and concerns. So I kind of wanted to make sure that when we think about kind of sharing as they get older, that you're really sharing that spectrum of your experiences, that you're kind of not just shielding them and only telling them about, kind of the good things that you've experienced and hope that they do the same. And in the same way, you don't want to just share what you did wrong and kind of, come at it from a self-shaming experience of, do as I say, not as I did kind of thing. You really want to kind of give them the spectrum that in your own experiences, there was things that were good about your experiences, and then there were things that were maybe harmful or hurtful. And so that helps them to understand their own stories through that lens of like, oh yeah, there's going to be things about what I've already experienced and will experience that will be helpful. And then there will be other things that will and are kind of harmful. You want to just make sure that these conversations feel like check-ins. Again, not investigating, just engaging, open curiosity, how they're using technology, use them as a resource. They may give you pushback, but I think at the end of the day, they like to be able to show what they're good at, and they're good at their phones. They're really good at it. And so even if, you don't necessarily need their help, it can just be a really great way for you to engage with them and saying like, hey, can you help me do this? It seems like you really enjoy it. I want to go on Instagram or whatever the thing is. And just let them kind of show you some of the skills that they've been honing over the last couple years. And then just continue to have them and encourage them to come to you with their questions and their excitements. So this is an example that I pulled from Delaney Rustin. If you're not familiar with her, she's a medical doctor. She is, I don't know exactly I think she produced it, but she really is sort of the person behind the Screenagers movie. It came out a couple years ago, and it's shown in schools. You may have seen it. You can check out her website. She's constantly kind of revamping her material to be more relevant. She does a really good job keeping up with the times, and she puts out multi-weekly email newsletters with different ideas. The one that I pulled is what's called her Tech Talk Tuesdays, and she has sort of a designated day of the week. On Tuesdays, she talks with her teenager. I think she might be in college now, but that was what she did, is she would talk to her every Tuesday, and she would just ask these open-ended questions. So I put some examples here on the screen of just what it looked like for her to be engaged, to not be investigating, to not be just trying to shove some ideas down her kid's throat, but is looking to be open while also helping her kid to be sort of critically thinking through, like, what about this and this? And when you do that and let them kind of go through and process, and if it's a conversation, then you get the opportunity to say, that totally makes sense how you're thinking of it, or, you can get a little bit more clear, but you can kind of tell them your perspective on how you decide to post versus text, and again, kind of be doing this together. So you want to be having those kind of set expectations, boundaries conversations, but you can't just leave them as little blips on the radar every couple months or when something big blows up. You really want to set a rhythm and a routine for talking through these issues and just being curious. And again, it's just a way that you can keep yourself kind of tuned in to what's going on with your kids, what's going on in their social peer groups. And again, I hope that it starts to feel a little bit more sustainable, that it's not so much you got to figure out all the right questions and do it in all the right ways. All right. Take a minute. Take a deep breath. What questions do you guys have at this point?
So what would you suggest if you've made a lot of the mistakes already of the how you've approached maybe some of the conversations?
Sure.
In the opposite way you've suggested to try to get back on track?
Yeah. Well, I think doing exactly what you're doing now, right? Which is just taking that inventory of sort of like, okay, how have we approached this? What strategies have we used up to this point? and kind of sifting through what's worked, what hasn't, and giving yourselves a lot of grace to saying, like, you don't have to get it all right. And, a lot of this is kind of trial and error to figuring out what works, what doesn't work, how does my kid respond to this? And then figuring out from there, like, kind of where the gaps are. If it was like, I came down too hard on a specific subject, kind of, then that kind of looks like maybe more of a conversation of repair, of just sort of like, hey, I've been really thinking about how badly you wanted X, or, when this subject came up, I got really upset about it and came down really hard on you, and I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to communicate that was bad or scare you in any way, but I do want us to have a conversation because I have these concerns. So just kind of coming back to, like, noticing where you got maybe a little caught up in some reactivity in yourself, maybe processing that outside of the relationship with your kid, and then just coming back into the relationship with just kind of the tip of the spear, which is just like, when I think about you on, Snapchat's a big one, so I always use it. I think about you on Snapchat, like, it just kind of scares me a little bit to think about you being on there. I'm just not comfortable yet with that. Here are my concerns, but I really want you to know that, like, I want you to be able to enjoy talking with your friends. And, again, kind of just trying to find more of that middle ground of, like, I have my concerns and there's some things that, I may just not be willing to budge on right now. But, like, I also want you to know that, like, I hear and I honor what you want to. Yeah, good question. Before we jump right into pornography, again, I want you just to kind of orient yourself back to your breath, kind of take a moment, notice how all of it's landing, jot anything down, rub those palms together, get grounded. You've got your senses back in your body. We can do it. And if you need to take a break, step away. Like I said, no judgment from me. I get it. All right, so here we go. So when we think about having this talk around pornography, really what we want to be doing is to talk about it in a way that helps put sex in its proper place. As Christians in particular, I think that we have an sort of extra amount of encouragement to be sex positive. And that probably, with the shaking of heads, is not always a lot of our experiences. So like I said at the beginning, I think it's really important to be clear about our stories, about our experiences as far as education, experiences growing up with our own sexual development, to be able to know kind of, where might we trip up, what might get triggered in us, so that we really can be in a place where we're encouraging the good. Because as Christians, getting to be sex positive is because we know that sex is all about intimacy at the end of the day. And if it's about intimacy, then it's about God. And so there is this created good to it. I want you to think about that sharing informed information, good information, accurate information about sex will not rob your kid of their innocence. I know that seems really big and scary, and I think has kind of been where the church has unfortunately been leaning, is that we've kind of been a little too vague or unclear about good education around sex, because we want to keep it as sacred, and we want to keep kids innocent, and I think that, again, using that dialectical thinking, there's a way to be super clear and to also maintain a sense of innocence. So as we talk about pornography, we'll also, it'll be kind of couched in also the sex ed conversation. So thinking about that idea of created good, that's the question I'll encourage us with is how can we be encouraging of the created good through these conversations? So pornography in particular, as adults talking to our kids, the goal is for us to become more porn literate and for our kids to become more porn literate. This may scare the bejesus out of you hearing this, because you may hear, no, thank you. I do not want to become porn literate. I would like to avoid it at all costs and keep it totally out of my house. That's fine too. Again, the desire is good to not want to inundate yourself, again, because potentially through your own stories or people close with you that there are some really serious consequences. And so wanting to be careful around this issue is good. But I think the best way that I've found to having these conversations is through that lens of porn literacy. Let's see where I want to start. So, so we talk about this too. We're wanting to both protect kids from sort of the adult appetite for sex, while also affirming, encouraging their curiosities about sex. And so that's why this literacy idea of understanding for ourselves sort of like what's the good parts of sex ed that I want to give them, and then what's sort of the stuff in porn, and a pornified culture, as it's been kind of called, do we want to protect from? The thing is, realistically, your kid is going to be exposed to some sort of pornographic content. I don't want this to be gloom and doom to say, but the research out there is saying that by 18, 92% of individuals are exposed to pornography. So I think we need to really move the conversation into not just talking about if your kid is exposed, but really into when your kid is exposed. Because I would say even maybe that 8% who somehow squeaks by without seeing pornographic content, they're still being exposed to a lot of sexual content. I know one of the things early on when I was working with, I can't remember how old the kid was that I was seeing, but late elementary school, and they had been exposed to pornography, and I was just exploring with her, have you ever seen anything like this before? And she was like, yeah, like walking in the grocery store, just the magazine racks. Like in her mind, what she was seeing on a Cosmo wasn't really that different than what she had seen on an explicit pornography site. So, again, we have to kind of use that as like, well, that pretty much means that 100% of kids are exposed to it. And so we want them to just be informed. We want to be informed ourselves to be able to having these conversations. And like I said, doing our best to shield when we can. But as we give them more freedom and sort of take some of the shields down, we want them to be encouraged, and we want them to be empowered, educated for life without us. We don't only get them until 18, and then they get 70, 80 years if y'all have good genes in your family outside of your home, so you really want to be setting them up to doing it on their own. So I'm going to go through sort of the basics of porn literacy. These are facts. As I put them together, I pulled from a lot of different sites and content, and they're really pretty values free. This isn't sort of Christian ideas about pornography. These are just facts about porn. And so I think that as you then think about how you want to have this conversation with your kid, you can add in your own values. But these are the basics that everybody needs to know about what pornography is. Pornography is a business. So it is made for entertainment. It's a business, and it is designed to make a profit. It's important that everybody knows that there's sexual content out there that some enjoy seeing, and then there's content out there that you will not enjoy and does not make you feel good. Pornography does not do a good job in honoring the human body. It is often leaving out and not representing natural and diverse bodies. There's violent, abusive, and dangerous actions and words being used, especially towards women. And these are not accurate depictions of healthy, consensual sex. Porn is not an accurate source for sexual health education. There is a lack of contraceptives and safe sex practices being shown. So these are just sort of your bullets of like, this is just from a non-values-based perspective where porn is lacking. Because again, the chances that as they get older, they may have people in their life where pornography is an important part of their life. It is something that they actually engage with. And so for them to be able to be critical thinkers where, you know, maybe you're encouraging them to say pornography is not something for lots of different reasons that I want you to be engaging with. You want them to just know the facts, to be able to think critically for themselves as they think through what's out there. And when we give kids accurate information like this, it really blesses them. I think it empowers them to know what's out there, and starts to kind of demystify what's out there. You know, when it's just put in the kind of porn is bad and scary box, that's sort of, it's like the Finding Nemo, like, don't go touch the boat, you know, and they want to go touch the butt kind of thing, you know. So the more we can demystify it and just say like, hey, this is what it is. It's out there. You may see it. Your friends may look at it, you know, but this is what I want you to go ahead and know before you see it, if you see it, if you've already seen it. And we will talk about kind of if your kid has already been exposed or is exposed in the future, kind of how to have those conversations. But you want to be on the front lines. So if we think back to those developmental stages, talking and educating about cyberbullying and porn was in that 4 to 8 range. So these conversations, you know, you don't necessarily have to teach your 4-year-old about the business of pornography and how, you know, people are making money off of that. That may not be developmentally appropriate just for their own minds, but just to be able to talk about it in ways that says like, it's just not really real, you know, that these are fake, these are movies, you know. And so thinking about ways to be able to talk about this that would make sense to them. So here we have our content protection. So we think about front lines is having the conversation early and often. So you want to go ahead and put it out there to them. I'm also going to be sending out after this, I have a whole resource sheet where I'll have books, websites, conversation topics. I've really tried to do a lot of resource compiling so you can just have it with you, to what are kind of your first defenses. So having the conversation is your first defense. Then actually protecting them from certain content is going to be first and second in there. At the top of my list is the Bark app. If you're not familiar with that, I find that that's the one that is the most comprehensive. So it allows you as the parent to be able to set categories for what you want to know is happening on your kids' devices. So you can set it up to filter and notify you if there's sexual content. You can put it to filter and notify you if there's like body image, eating disorder kinds of content out there, bullying, weapons, I mean, you can really kind of filter down for the things that you want to be able to have more restrictions on, and that it'll kind of let you know sort of what they're looking for, what's happening on interactions. So what's nice is that it's not helicopter, you're reading every message that's getting sent back and forth between them and their friends, but it will pick out some key words. Where an example that I had from a colleague was that, like, her daughter, I think, had looked up diets, and it flagged diet, where she was just like, I'm not worried about my daughter having an eating disorder, but I would like to know, if she's looking up diets, what's going on with that, just sort of like, so we can have that conversation. And her daughter knows in advance, what restrictions and things do pop up. And so there's not this sneak attack, like, what, you were looking at my phone kind of thing. Her daughter knows. And in a way, I think it was actually a really great thing. I mean, if, you think about kind of what your kids are looking up, they're looking for answers. They're clearly curious. And so it kind of reroutes them back into engagement and relationship with you. And so that's why that is my number one. So it's the Bark app. It's also what the Archdiocese of New Orleans is doing a really great job to educating and encouraging parents, families to just have more resources, and as far as kind of combating the porn problem. And so their two main are the Bark app and Covenant Eyes. So Covenant Eyes is solely a filtering and accountability software. It's a browser that you download to your computer and tablets, or phones, and it really restricts any sort of pornographic, sexually inappropriate content, and then sends reports every so often. You can set up accountability partners and that kind of stuff. So that's what, then the three below that are just some other accountability or filtering software. And then Common Sense Media here at the bottom is going to be your go-to for, when your kid says, can I go see this movie with my friends? Can I get this new game at GameStop? You can go into Common Sense Media, and it does a really good job using common sense, where it does kind of that dialectical, where it says, these are the things that are great about this movie, game, app, and here are the potential risks or consequences. And so then you as the parent can kind of look at that. And especially as they get older, I would encourage you and your kids sitting down, and kind of saying, like, all right, so you want to use this. All right, so this is what this says. Here's the facts about what could be really cool about this. Here are the things that are not so cool. Let's have that conversation, engage their critical thinking of again, what they feel like they could get out of it versus maybe some of the vulnerabilities that it might set them up for. So these are the things to consider if you discover that there has been some exposure to pornographic material. And this, really could be at any point in their development, though the conversation will be different, just like we said, kind of at the different ages. Take a deep breath, right? That's the first and go-to behavior, is take your deep breath. Like I said, the chances are high it's probably going to happen. So take a deep breath. How you handle this depends on their age, but these are the questions that you can be thinking through as you think through how you want to respond, because regardless of their age, a response is needed. I think I've talked a lot about how to temper the response, but we also don't want to swing so far that there's no response. I think that on either end, there's some real damage that can happen. We're really just trying to find that sweet spot of being able to respond and stay engaged without too much reactivity or too much disengagement and avoidance. Don't do this alone. It doesn't have to be even, you could be parenting your child alone. If it is a spouse, a partner, that's ideal to kind of grounding yourself, talking through some of these questions. But if you're doing this alone, finding those safe friends, talking to God about this, knowing that like God is with you in these conversations. He's not surprised by this. He's not scared by this. And so you can then just kind of start to find your footing again and seek out your resources. So here are the questions I want you to think through. You want to think through sort of what the motivation was. Was it intentional, unintentional? What was the search? Was this the first time? What did they see? That can be a really tricky question to ask, just because, again, you have to kind of be in a okay place to opening yourself up to what you might hear them say they saw. So again, this is where that self-care comes in, because if it is something that triggers something in you, then you want to make sure that you can do what you need to do to just be there for them, to not react out of just shock and fear into scaring them even more, because potentially they may not know sort of what is really bad. If it's a first exposure, they're probably just really confused about what they saw. You want to put yourself in their shoes, thinking about how are they feeling? How can you, so thinking for yourself, how can I help them to understand what they're exposed to, seeing yourself as an ally for them. So figuring out, are there shields that I can kind of tighten up and put in place? How can I be having this conversation maybe a little bit more often, creating more safety? What can I affirm in them? Because if you know about it, somehow you know about it. So, if they came to you, being really, really honoring and affirming. If you did see, if you kind of discovered them, just trying to find some nuggets of like what you can still affirm in them, that, they did close it or whatever the thing was, asking them what safety plan they put in place. And just going back at the end of the day to how this impacts you. So as we think about distilling down for that nugget, we want to be searching for the good. What we know is that God wired us for connection. God is a relationship in the Trinity. God gives us senses to see, taste, feel things that bring us pleasure. So these are all things that we can be encouraging and looking for in these conversations, and encouraging ourselves as the ones kind of standing in that gap with the kids, and then encouraging in the kids themselves that it's through weakness, it's through the times that we mess up as parents, that they mess up as kids, that weakness is the currency through which grace just abounds. And so figuring out, and that's where we'll land today, is figuring out how do we move from educating, informing, setting these expectations, to really seeing those conversations as an avenue for more grace with ourselves and with our kids. And I loved this idea as we kind of shift to thinking about boundaries too. This idea that when we do get clear, when we do share accurate information, I want you to consider some positive aspects. When infused with biblical values and attitudes, sex education can be a window for a child to see the beauty of God and his creative power. They can see divine purpose in the creation of their bodies. They can develop honor and respect for the opposite gender because they see them as created in God's image. They can learn to marvel at how life begins and develops in the womb, and they can begin to appreciate the special bond that married couples have. And they can learn to value modesty because they treasure the gift of their bodies. So again, really thinking about like, how do we kind of take these informative educational pieces into how this creates this beauty and awe. So we're always looking to connect those things. So when we think about setting boundaries, we've been talking about this all along the way, but the most simple explanation of what a boundary is that it is setting what is okay and what's not okay. When we set boundaries, this empowers healthy choices, and our kids are encouraged to develop internal boundaries. So we help them develop inside what you've been providing outside. Because like I said, you only get them for 18 years. So if you're only providing outside, when those things come down, do they have anything to go back to on the inside? So setting boundaries is a way that you help them to develop the internal resources. This happens through the law of reaping and sowing. So they learn that actions have consequences, both positive and negative, and that consequences come naturally, immediately, and are congruent with the behavior. And so character and inner strength develops as they're able to see that their actions, their choices have an energy and a movement to them. Boundaries also mean that there's going to be some conflict because boundaries run into each other. When that boundary pushback happens, that is not a cue or a signal for you to go away. That is an opportunity for you to be leaning in. You can empathize that life is hard. Boundaries suck sometimes. And you can be with them in that. You can help them understand that limits are real and that we live happier lives when we live within those limits. So as adults, as parents, caregivers, when we are able to maintain our own composure, kids, teenagers are better able to recognize their own misbehavior and sort of make those adjustments. So sort of thinking about like, you know, these boundaries, you're a hula hoop, they're a hula hoop, like they're gonna run into one another at some point. But if we can just stay steady, you know, and they're pushing and kind of moving all around, the best that you can stay steady, eventually they'll have to find their equilibrium and kind of figuring out like, I can either keep doing this dance back and forth, or I can kind of find a spot that I'm okay with because I know that mom and dad, they're not budging. And so you want to be able to, again, use relationships within your marriage, friends, God, church family, to be able to help maintain that composure. It is not something that you should be expected to just have to do alone, because that is not easy to do. And especially as kids get older too, that they develop more relationships, even just outside of the parental relationships. Kind of having an extended family of caring adults is really important for them because those offer more supports that really just provide kind of a norm that they get used to, that this is just kind of how life works best. When we think about setting these boundaries, we want to use this idea of connecting and then redirecting. It's an idea from an author, and I put him on the resource list, Dr. Dan Siegel, and he's a neuropsychologist, but he is primarily dealing in the realm of parenting, and he does it throughout the lifespan. And so he talks about when we choose to connect first, it actually helps our brains. So it helps both the adult parent brain and the kid brain to be more open and receptive to one another. When our brains are in that like kind of panicky, anxiety, fight or flight mode, we actually hear things different. Like they've done studies that we hear like higher pitches and that kind of stuff, so if you've had just like full out brawls in your house and it's like, you said this and and you're like, what? That didn't even happen, is like, well, that's just what happens, is that like these signals just totally miss one another because our brains are having a hard time catching and processing all the information. So connecting first helps kind of to calm, soothe the brain so it can be in a more receptive position. And I think from the theological perspective, it really is what models incarnational ministry. When we think about Jesus's ministry in particular, that was his mode, is to be totally in, totally attuned, totally connected, and then offering redirection, offering correction. And so using this model of connecting and then redirecting gives them grace and gives yourself grace. Because if you're connecting and then redirecting, it's not just a one-time thing. It's, again, this just empowers connection and models for them what healthy relationship looks like too. Because again, if we're wanting to monitor and help guide with social media, gaming, pornography, at the end of the day, we're trying to encourage and empower what does true relationship, what does true intimacy look like. And I think this is the best way that we can do it. All right, another deep breath. We made it. So for these questions, I want you just to think through as we kind of finish up today, and then, it's almost 11, but I'll stay online and answer any questions. And we can put it in the recording or take it off too. So y'all let me know. But I want you just to do some reflecting as we finish up for today. I want you to think about having this conversation and start with asking yourself, what graces have you already been given? What grace have you already been given that encourages you to persevere in these conversations? I want you to think about next, who has modeled loving boundaries and grace-filled redirection in your life? That question may bring up more questions. So this may lead you into thinking about any wounds from your past of maybe too little boundaries in engagement or overbearing boundaries engagement. And maybe those wounds are getting picked at. Who can you process that with? And then to take it really practical and thinking about leaving today, it's just what conversation, what boundary can you start with? Start small. Don't tackle it all. You don't have to. You don't have to do it today. But just kind of start with what's one piece that you could start with. And then what resources can you use? Who's there to help you? As you think through those questions and answers, just find another deep breath. And then you can shoot me any of your questions. Like I said, give us a little bit of time here. If there's anything else bubbling up, I can go back to some stuff. And then for anybody who's watching this after the fact or wants to ask me a question offline, go ahead and email me. So that's my email address. I'm open. If you think about it today, tomorrow, a month from now, I'm totally open to that. And like I said, I'll be sending out, a follow-up email with our Redeemer chat. And if you're not on that, email me. I'll get you the resources with a handout, resources and tips to encourage these conversations. So thank you for joining me. And any questions I'll take.
Thank you, Anna Gray. This is awesome. I'm so glad we have you on speed dial because you're in our village.
Yeah.
Not a question, but I will say, because I know I went to your first workshop that you did this. This is a great encouragement to continue to do this.
Yeah.
Even though, even if we've heard it,
Totally.
it helps hear it again
Yeah.
in different seasons of our child's lives as they're growing up.
Yeah.
So thank you. Lots of people I'm sending this to.
Great. Thanks, Pauline.
I have a question about I'm now all of a sudden like trying to navigate this because my plan was just we weren't going to do any kind of social media presence for a really long time as long as I can maintain that.
Totally.
And now that seems to be not really possible anymore.
Yeah.
My kids are like begging, trying to find ways to connect with their friends right now.
Yeah.
And they're 6 and 9. Like, do you have some advice on ways that they can do that that's appropriate and like
Yeah.
the start of the conversation I could be having right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially in just our present moment, there is a need for all of us to be able to use more of the social media platforms to connect with people outside of our houses for both the sake of our houses and just our own, mental health, that like we do need to be able to connect. So, I mean, a couple just things that come to mind, would be figuring out, kind of how and what they'll be using, so like, is it something that they could FaceTime with a friend on your phone? Is that even something that they want to do? If that is something that they want to do, can you kind of find a middle ground? 6 and 9 is still too young to give them just like total free reign of like, yeah, go do whatever you want to do, but especially with 9, you want to give them a little bit of freedom. So can they, go in the other room and talk to their friend with the door open, kind of still, again, allowing you to have some monitoring insight into that, but allowing them to feel like they can, have some time with their friends. I think something that I've been seeing and totally see within myself too, is that like the face-to-face quality is so important. I can text with friends, call them on the phone, but I know that I've been really treasuring having the face-to-face interactions, whether it's through like a kind of video chat kind of thing. I don't know if you're familiar with like Marco Polo, where you're sending short little videos back and forth. They don't go away like Snapchat or anything like that. But really thinking about like how as humans do we connect? And it's like, well, we do it through shared interests, but at the end of the day, it's experiential. Like, it's when I hear you engaging with me, but also like see you engaging with me. So I think there is sort of that like eye contact that's so important, and that, again, I have concerns in kind of our present day that is going to be a little bit lost. So as far as just sort of like what your kids could be using or doing, I think the resources then I would point you to is Common Sense Media. They do a really great job just kind of going through like if there's interactive games that, your kids could play back and forth, like, if there's a chess game online that, they could play with and chat with their friends, kind of like what are the ones that are legitimate, what are ones that are just like spammy, what are ones that, are gonna link them to crazy stuff that you don't want them to get in. So I would say that would probably be my like go-to place of figuring out like what is even out there for my kid, other than the ones that probably you think through, which is like, do they talk on the phone or FaceTime or do whatever? Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah. Thanks.
Anna Gray.
Yeah.
So at the last workshop, I can't remember if this was in one of the book resources you shared, but just kind of simple steps for children. And I know we'll alter it all based on our own children and kind of their ages, but just, kind of, you'd mentioned like steps when they do encounter something, like helping them think about like, what were the steps, like walk away.
Yeah, I know where that was from. It's from Good Pictures, Bad Pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a book. It's on my resource list, if you aren't familiar with it. So it's a good pictures, bad pictures. It's a picture book for, I'd say, the like 5, 6 to like 8 or 9 range. It's a little younger. And then there's a junior, which is for like, sort of toddler into, kindergarten age kids. But it walks them through, what is a good picture, what is a bad picture, pretty simple, clear. And then their plan is a can-do plan. All right. Well, if you have any other questions, you know where to find me. Like I said to anybody else out there, email me at Redeemer. I also have a practice. We are still doing therapy online, so you can catch me there too if sort of more intensive advice therapy needs to be happening. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Anna Gray.
Thank you. So good.